Try not to cry. When you see what happened to Katt Williams at 54, what if the laughter that made millions smile came from a man slowly breaking inside? Katt Williams, the genius, the rebel, the voice too fearless for Hollywood, has lived a story more painful than his punchlines. From brilliance to breakdown, his journey exposes the dark truth behind fame, race, and survival in America. This isn't just about comedy. It's about the cost of telling the truth in a world built on illusion. Stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and join us on Legends of Black Excellence as we uncover the rise, fall, and untold legacy of Katt Williams. A nation that doesn't care about tragedy. At 54, Katt Williams remains a symbol of both brilliance and torment, a living paradox whose laughter often hides unspeakable pain. Born Micah Sierra Williams in Cincinnati, Ohio, his early life was shaped by strict religious discipline and emotional solitude. In a home ruled by Jehovah's Witness doctrine, curiosity was considered rebellion and intelligence a burden to be controlled. While other children were grounded for mischief, Katt was punished by having his books taken away. That loss of knowledge, his only refuge, carved a void no applause could ever fill. Even as a child, he sensed that the world valued obedience more than truth, and compassion was a luxury few could afford. Years later, he would summarize his entire journey in one haunting statement: "You can't afford to be depressed in America. This country doesn't care about your tragedy." Those words weren't just philosophy. They were survival. At 13, the burden of misunderstanding became too heavy to bear. The walls of his family home, once filled with ritual and prayer, had become a cage. Each confrontation with his father ignited a deeper fire, the realization that intellect without freedom is just another form of imprisonment. Rather than risk another violent clash, the young boy chose exile. With only $2,500 and a Rottweiler puppy, he left behind safety for uncertainty, comfort for chaos. That night, he boarded a truck heading south and never looked back. His destination wasn't fame or fortune, it was escape. Miami would become both his punishment and his teacher. The city's humid nights and silent parks became classrooms where he learned the curriculum of loneliness, hunger, and survival. In Coconut Grove Park, surrounded by palm trees and broken benches, a homeless teenager began rebuilding his mind. Each sunrise found him in the public library devouring words that no one could take away from him anymore. He read philosophy, science, and poetry, feeding a mind that refused to wither even in poverty. But when the library closed and the streetlights came on, knowledge no longer paid for dinner. Desperation taught him to scan parking lots for unlocked cars and radios that could be sold for a few dollars. Every theft came with guilt, but also with resolve, the unspoken vow that one day he would earn with his wit what he once stole with his hands. In those dark alleys, he discovered a different kind of intelligence, the ability to read people, to disarm anger with humor, to survive through charm. This is where the comedian was truly born, not on a stage, but under the open sky of Miami. The same wit that once alienated him at home became a weapon against despair. When he finally stood in front of an audience years later, he didn't tell jokes to entertain. He told truths disguised as laughter. The boy who fled from silence had learned to turn pain into rhythm, fear into timing, and tragedy into performance. His story began with abandonment, but evolved into defiance, the kind that forces people to look beyond the laughter and see the scars beneath. At 13, Katt Williams didn't just run away from home. He ran toward destiny, and the world would never laugh the same way again. A gifted child in a house without understanding. From the very beginning, Micah Sierra Williams was not like other children. By the age of 3, he could already read fluently, devouring words with a hunger that frightened his parents more than it impressed them. In the quiet corners of his Cincinnati home, he found comfort in books, the only companions that never raised their voices. But in a household bound tightly by the doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses, curiosity was not celebrated. It was controlled. Knowledge to his father meant danger, a door that opened to rebellion and questioning authority. Whenever young Micah disobeyed, his punishment was not isolation or scolding, but something far worse for a child like him. His books were taken away. What should have been a sanctuary of learning became a battlefield of control. While his peers played outside, he sat in silence, punished for the very thing that made him extraordinary. His father, John Cornell Williams, had once fought for equality as part of the Black Panther Party, a movement built on resistance, intellect, and discipline. Yet inside his own home, that same discipline hardened into dominance. He wanted a son molded by faith, not free thought, by obedience, not independence. His mother, Brenda Louise, tried to soften the tension, balancing devotion with maternal compassion. But she too was bound by their faith's rigid expectations. The household was a place where emotion was seen as weakness, and questioning divine authority could spark a storm. Micah's mind was growing faster than his parents could understand, and that brilliance only widened the distance between them. He was a gifted boy trapped inside a belief system that equated intelligence with arrogance and curiosity with sin. By the time he turned 12, his intellect had already reached beyond his environment. He won recognition from the National Science Academy in Dayton, earning a full scholarship that could have changed his future forever. But instead of celebrating, fear consumed him. He realized that success would only deepen the conflict at home, proof that his path was diverging too far from the one his parents demanded. In an act of quiet rebellion, he deliberately failed a math exam, sabotaging his own achievement just to avoid confrontation. That decision became a silent scream for freedom, the first act of defiance from a boy who had learned that brilliance could also be a curse. The household soon became a storm of accusations, guilt, and fear. Each argument escalated until words gave way to threats and silence became the only safe language. One evening, staring into his father's eyes, Micah understood that love had turned into a battlefield. He realized that one of them might not survive the next outburst if he stayed. So, at 13, he made the most adult decision of his life. He left. He chose the uncertainty of the streets over the security of walls that suffocated him. That night marked not just the end of his childhood, but the birth of Katt Williams, a mind forged in conflict, driven by pain, and destined to turn his suffering into something the world would never forget. Homeless at 13, lessons from the streets. When Micah Sierra Williams arrived in Miami at 13, he was not escaping home, he was escaping confinement. The bus dropped him into a city bursting with color, temptation, and danger. He found himself in Coconut Grove, where palm trees swayed over cracked benches and the ocean wind carried more hunger than hope. With a Rottweiler as his only friend, the boy built a life from scraps. The park became his shelter, the streets his classroom, and survival his teacher. Days blended into nights filled with the hum of passing cars and the distant laughter of people who had roofs over their heads. He learned quickly that being invisible was safer than being noticed. Hunger, cold, and exhaustion became constants, but so did determination. Every sunrise reminded him that no one was coming to rescue him, and somehow that truth made him stronger. The public library soon became his refuge, the only place where silence didn't mean fear. Each morning he walked in barefoot or in worn-out sneakers, claiming a spot in the corner where no one would ask questions. For 8 hours a day, he devoured pages like food. Science, literature, politics, philosophy, he read everything. In 4 years, he estimated he'd finished more than 10,000 books. The librarians began to recognize the quiet teenager who never borrowed, only consumed. Reading became both shield and salvation, feeding a mind starved for meaning. Every story he absorbed became a map, guiding him through the chaos outside. But knowledge could not fill an empty stomach. When night fell, the dreamer turned survivor again. The same hands that once turned pages now searched car doors, testing handles under flickering streetlights. Stealing radios was not an act of malice, it was desperation wrapped in survival instinct. The routine was simple: scout, snatch, sell, eat. Each theft bought another day of life, another morning in the library. Yet beneath that rhythm of survival, something profound was awakening. On the streets, he discovered another kind of intelligence, one that couldn't be learned from books. He began observing people, the way anger flared in their eyes before violence, the way laughter could dissolve tension in a heartbeat. Humor became his invisible weapon. When confronted, he could talk his way out with charm and wit. Every exchange was an experiment in human psychology, and his mind cataloged it all. It was there, amid the noise and danger of Miami, that he began crafting the rhythm of a performer, sharp, fast, and unpredictable. At 15, he stumbled into a small Florida comedy club, hungry for a legal way to make money. He lied about his age, convinced the owner to give him 5 minutes, and stepped onto a stage for the first time. The moment the lights hit him, something inside clicked. The audience laughed, not out of pity, but recognition. His words carried the raw honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. For the first time, his pain became applause. That night, the homeless boy from Coconut Grove transformed into a storyteller. The streets had given him the material, and the stage gave him a voice. From that moment forward, comedy wasn't just performance, it was redemption. From the streets to stardom, the rise of Money Mike. By the early 2000s, the boy who once slept under Miami palms had become a man ready to take on the world. Katt Williams, with his sharp tongue and magnetic energy, was no longer an unknown figure wandering open mic stages. He was a storm of brilliance waiting to erupt. Years of hardship had polished his humor into something more than entertainment. It was survival turned into art. In 2001, opportunity arrived in the form of an audition for Friday After Next, the third installment of Ice Cube's beloved film series. He walked into the room not as a polished actor, but as a man who had lived every hustle the script described. When the casting panel watched him embody the flashy, fast-talking Money Mike, they didn't see performance, they saw authenticity. His words snapped like electricity, his confidence radiated off the screen, and in that moment, a legend was born. Released in 2002, Friday After Next became a holiday classic, and Katt's portrayal of Money Mike stole scenes from even its stars. Ice Cube, who both acted and produced the film, instantly recognized Katt's rare chemistry, a raw mixture of street wisdom and comedic precision. Alongside the smooth charisma of Mike Epps, Katt's exaggerated swagger and razor-sharp timing created a trio of chaos and charm that audiences couldn't forget. Money Mike wasn't just funny. He was a reflection of the survivalist spirit that had defined Katt's own life. The gaudy clothes, the fearless confidence, the hustler mentality, it all came from real memories. For millions watching, he was no longer a background comic. He was a cultural voice representing the clever resilience of those who refused to break no matter how hard the world pushed. As his film career bloomed, his presence on stage exploded. Bet's Comic View introduced him to a national audience, and soon Katt was filling clubs and arenas with fans drawn to his unique rhythm. His jokes weren't simple punchlines, they were insights wrapped in laughter. He spoke about survival hypocrisy and race with the authority of someone who had lived through it all. His stage persona, equal parts philosopher, hustler, and truth-teller, made him unlike any other comedian of his era. By 2006, HBO took notice, giving him his own special The Pimp Chronicles PD1. What followed was a performance that cemented his name among comedy's greats. With his signature energy, fiery delivery, and diamond-sharp wit, Katt held audiences captive for over an hour, commanding laughter while confronting uncomfortable truths about life in America. The Pimp Chronicles didn't just entertain, it defined a generation of comedy. Quotes from the special echoed across barbershops, college dorms, and living rooms long before the age of social media virality. Critics praised his intelligence, audiences celebrated his honesty, and the industry finally recognized his genius. For Katt Williams, it was the pinnacle of years spent clawing his way out of darkness. The homeless teen from Coconut Grove had become a cultural phenomenon, not through luck, but through unfiltered truth and relentless will. Fame, however, would prove to be both blessing and burden. But in that moment, under the hot lights of HBO's stage, he wasn't haunted by the past. He was standing in it transformed, and the world finally saw what the streets of Miami had already known: Katt Williams was unstoppable. Fame, fear, and the prison of the pimp persona. At the height of his fame, Katt Williams appeared untouchable, a man whose quicksilver wit and magnetic stage presence could ignite any crowd. But behind the laughter, the applause, and the bright lights, a different story unfolded. Success, once a dream, began to feel like a weight pressing against his chest. Every show sold out, every headline praised his genius. Yet the man behind the microphone felt an ache that no encore could soothe. The same fame that had lifted him from the streets now chained him to an image he could no longer escape. The pimp persona, sharp suits, confident swagger, diamond-studded jokes had made him a household name, but it also became a costume he couldn't take off. Audiences expected arrogance, not vulnerability. Punchlines, not pain. Slowly, Katt began to realize that the world loved his performance, but not his truth. The pressure of constant visibility crept into every corner of his life. Hollywood demanded more tours, more specials, more interviews, as if his exhaustion were just another part of the act. His finances swelled with millions, yet his peace of mind withered. Every business deal came with suspicion. Every handshake carried questions of loyalty. Having grown up learning that trust could turn to betrayal overnight, he now found that wealth only magnified those fears. Money, relationships, and ambition twisted into a cycle of anxiety. He feared losing it all, not just his fortune, but the freedom he had fought for since childhood. Late at night, surrounded by luxury, he often felt as homeless as the boy who once slept under Miami skies. The noise of success drowned out the quiet he had once cherished in libraries and parks. Friends became strangers, and strangers became opportunists. The people who laughed beside him often wanted something more than his friendship, access, status, or profit. Fame blurred the line between genuine affection and manipulation, leaving him isolated in rooms full of admirers. To protect himself, Katt began to retreat, building invisible walls around his emotions. The charisma that once drew crowds now served as armor, hiding the exhaustion beneath the humor. He mastered the art of smiling through suspicion, performing happiness even when his spirit was unraveling. The more he tried to maintain control, the more chaos seemed to follow. Each headline about his eccentric behavior or confrontations in public painted him as volatile, when in truth, he was a man drowning quietly in expectations too heavy for one heart to carry. By his own admission, Katt's greatest battle was not with critics but with himself. The inner conflict between authenticity and performance tore at him daily. He longed to strip away the persona and speak as Micah, the boy who once read to survive, yet the industry had no room for that voice. To fans, he was the untouchable comedian. To executives, a brand. Somewhere in between, the man was disappearing. Despite fame, he found no lasting joy, only fleeting relief in the laughter of strangers. What once began as liberation had turned into captivity under his own creation. The world saw the diamonds, the swagger, and the defiance, but not the loneliness hidden behind the punchlines. In the mirror, he no longer saw a legend, only a survivor wondering if the cost of being unforgettable was losing himself entirely. Speaking truth to power comedy as resistance. When Katt Williams stood under the bright glare of success, he realized that truth came with a price. By the late 2000s, his comedy had evolved into something sharper and far more dangerous than mere entertainment. It was revelation. He no longer spoke just to make crowds laugh. He spoke to expose, to provoke, to awaken. In his 2008 HBO special, It's Pimpin' Pimpin', Williams tore into America's political fabric, laying bare hypocrisy and injustice with a comedian's rhythm and a prophet's fury. He talked about race corruption and the invisible chains of power that shaped the lives of those who looked like him. Each punchline landed like a warning wrapped in laughter. The audiences roared, but in boardrooms and media offices, his honesty sounded like rebellion. Hollywood wanted charm. not confrontation, and Katt had become the one thing the industry feared most, a truth-teller in a business built on illusion. For years, the system had rewarded him for playing characters that made people comfortable, the smooth-talking hustler, the clever outsider. But once he began questioning that same system, the applause grew uneasy. His stand-up no longer fit neatly into the mold of mainstream comedy. Journalists began labeling him unpredictable, a word that too often replaces uncontrollable. Behind the microphone, he dissected the exploitation of black entertainers and the cycle that turns artists into commodities. He accused record label studios and executives of feeding on the very pain they refused to acknowledge. To some, it was bravery. To others, it was madness. The more candid he became, the more doors began to close. Show offers dwindled and industry allies grew distant. He had stepped across an invisible line, one that separated entertainers from agitators, and once crossed, there was no turning back. The stage, once his sanctuary, became a battlefield. Crowds still adored him, but whispers began following him everywhere that he was difficult, paranoid, or unstable. Tabloids twisted his social commentary into controversy. Every interview became a test, every sentence dissected for scandal. Yet Williams refused to soften his message. He continued to speak about America's obsession with image, the emptiness of fame, and the erasure of genuine voices in a machine that profits from conformity. His humor remained electric, but his tone-darkened laughter now served as camouflage for rage. When others joked about celebrities and pop culture, Katt aimed his wit at systems of oppression. That courage earned him loyal fans who saw him as a mirror of their own frustrations, but it also isolated him from an industry terrified of accountability. As his defiance grew, his career began to tremble. Networks hesitated, sponsors withdrew, and former collaborators avoided association. Yet through the chaos, Katt Williams stood firm, unwilling to trade authenticity for approval. The man who once used comedy to survive was now using it to fight. In its pimpin'. Pimpin', he declared that laughter was his weapon, and truth his only loyalty. What the world saw as controversy, he viewed as liberation. His journey through fame had taught him that honesty in entertainment is a dangerous currency. It buys integrity but costs everything else. And for Katt Williams, that was a price worth paying. The breakdown, bipolar disorder, and public collapse. In late 2008, the laughter that once followed Katt Williams began to fade into confusion. Crowds who had once seen him as unstoppable now whispered about his erratic behavior, unsure if they were witnessing performance or breakdown. The headlines turned cold when reports surfaced from South Carolina. The comedian, barefoot and wearing only a bathrobe and a towel around his head, was seen wandering the grounds of a small inn in the early hours of the morning. When police arrived, he asked for directions to the nearest hospital. For a man whose sharp mind had once commanded arenas, it was a haunting image. The world that once applauded his brilliance now watched his unraveling as spectacle. The hospitalization that followed revealed the weight he had carried for years, a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. His struggle, long hidden behind his quick wit, could no longer be masked by stage lights. The news spread quickly, and the same media outlets that once praised his courage now painted him as unstable. Instead of compassion, he was met with ridicule. Society had always celebrated his eccentricity, but it recoiled from his vulnerability. Rather than a cry for help, his illness became content, something to be consumed and mocked. For the Black community, his experience echoed a broader silence around mental health. In a culture that prized strength and survival-seeking therapy was still taboo, especially for men raised to believe that pain should be endured privately. Katt's breakdown exposed that cruel paradox. A man who had spent his life making others laugh was now punished for showing his own humanity. His diagnosis didn't earn him empathy. It isolated him further. In interviews that followed, he appeared fragile yet defiant, refusing pity even as his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The years after his hospitalization were turbulent. Between 2009 and 2016, a string of arrests and altercations dominated his public image. Each incident, a scuffle in a restaurant, a police confrontation, a parking lot argument became another headline erasing his legacy. The lowest point came in 2016 when footage emerged of Katt fighting a 7th-grade student on a field in Georgia. The video went viral within hours, transforming a moment of crisis into global humiliation. His shows were canceled, promoters backed away, and audiences who once filled theaters now hesitated. The industry that had profited from his genius showed no mercy as he spiraled. Behind the chaos, there was no safety net, no system designed to catch an artist battling the double-edged sword of fame and untreated trauma. Through it all, Katt's decline mirrored a deeper societal failure. America has long turned a blind eye to the mental health struggles of its black performers, choosing entertainment over empathy. His story became a tragic reflection of that neglect, a nation eager to laugh at the breakdown of a man it once crowned king. For Katt, survival had always been an act of will, but even the strongest will can fracture under the pressure of expectation and isolation. The streets had once taught him how to live without comfort. Fame taught him how to suffer without compassion. Beneath the headlines and viral clips was not a fallen star, but a wounded soul, still searching for peace in a world that only valued his pain when it could be packaged and sold. Isolation and the cost of genius. There came a point when Katt Williams could no longer tell where the stage ended and the solitude began. Fame, once a shelter from the pain of his past, had turned into another kind of confinement. In the midst of legal troubles, canceled shows, and public scrutiny, he announced that he was walking away from stand-up comedy, the art form that had saved his life. The declaration, delivered in a quiet moment rather than a press conference, stunned those who had followed his career from the beginning. For decades, comedy had been his heartbeat. Now he said he was done. The laughter that had once kept him alive began to sound hollow in his ears. The decision was less about surrender and more about survival, a final attempt to protect what was left of his sanity. But leaving the stage didn't bring peace. Without the structure of performance, Katt found himself adrift in a silence he didn't know how to inhabit. Around him, people who had once cheered his success divided into two worlds. Some saw his vulnerability as an opportunity, continuing to exploit his name, even as his stability faltered. They scheduled appearances, took advances, and pocketed profits from a man too exhausted to fight back. Others, the few who genuinely cared, tried to intervene, urging him to rest, to seek consistent treatment, to rebuild. Yet every offer of help sounded to Katt like manipulation. Years of betrayal had eroded his ability to trust anyone, even those who loved him. Friends who once toured with him found their calls unanswered. Managers who had guided his rise were replaced by strangers whispering promises of redemption. Each betrayal confirmed his growing paranoia, and the circle around him grew smaller until it was just him alone with the noise inside his own head. Mental illness, unchecked and misunderstood, began to blur his sense of reality. What had started as defensive caution hardened into isolation. He doubted his own memories, second-guessed every emotion, and questioned whether the applause had ever been real. Fame had magnified his insecurities, and now stripped of its protection, he faced them in full. At times, he appeared lucid, philosophical, and grounded. At others, he spoke in spirals that revealed how deeply the disorder had taken root. Those closest to him described moments of piercing clarity, followed by stretches of silence that could last days. The mind that once spun gold from chaos was now turning against him. He had built a career on dissecting human behavior, but now he could barely interpret his own. Still, beneath the instability, there remained a flicker of the man who had once conquered every stage he touched. Even in isolation, Katt Williams refused to surrender entirely to despair. He wrote in notebooks, recorded monologues, and filled hours with reflections on faith and forgiveness. Yet his self-imposed exile came with a heavy cost, the loss of community, of collaboration, of the very connection that had made his art so electric. The tragedy wasn't only that he withdrew from the world, but that the world let him. As those who had profited from his talent moved on to new stars, Katt was left behind a reminder of what happens when genius outpaces the structures meant to sustain it. His solitude was not chosen out of arrogance, but born from exhaustion, the final act of a man who had given everything to make others laugh and found himself with no laughter left for his own healing. The Club Shay Shay interview, Brilliance and Delusion. In 2024, the world was reminded that Katt Williams was still a voice impossible to ignore. When he sat across from Shannon Sharpe on the Club Shay Shay podcast, millions tuned in expecting a routine celebrity chat. What they witnessed instead was a masterclass in both intellect and volatility. Within the first 24 hours, the interview surpassed 1 million views, a viral eruption that proved his magnetism had never faded. Wearing his trademark confidence, Williams spoke with the rhythm of a preacher and the precision of a lawyer. He dismantled illusions about Hollywood, naming names and accusing fellow comedians of stealing jokes and profiting from others' creativity. Each word carried the sharpness of a man who had lived every battle he described. Yet beneath the brilliance, there was an edge, an undertone of chaos, as if his thoughts were racing faster than his sentences could contain. Shannon Sharpe, a seasoned host and former NFL champion, met the challenge with composure. He listened occasionally, prodding, never interrupting the flow of his guest's stream of consciousness. The conversation veered between searing honesty and wild conjecture, revealing both the clarity and the confusion that defined Katt's present state. When he spoke of betrayal in the comedy circuit, his anger was palpable, but so was his pain. He spoke not just as an artist, but as a wounded veteran of an industry that chews through its talent. At moments, his insight was staggering, exposing patterns of exploitation, racial politics, and hypocrisy that few dared to voice publicly. But just as quickly, his monologue would spiral into grand proclamations about his genius and destiny, leaving even Sharpe searching for balance between empathy and disbelief. In one striking moment, Katt compared Sharpe to Larry King, a name that carried both reverence and nostalgia. He explained that he rarely gave interviews because most hosts lacked integrity, saying only a few, like Larry King or you, had the depth to hold real conversations. That statement encapsulated the paradox of Katt Williams, fiercely intelligent, deeply principled, yet consumed by distrust. For every moment of lucidity, there was another of self-exaltation, a sense that he was both prophet and prisoner of his own mind. The comparison to King wasn't just flattery. It revealed his yearning for serious recognition, for dialogues that went beyond gossip and spectacle. But it also underscored his alienation, a genius looking for equals in a world that preferred caricatures to complexity. The aftermath of the Club Shay Shay appearance split audiences down the middle. Admirers praised his courage, calling it the most authentic interview of the decade. Critics dismissed it as the ramblings of an unstable man chasing attention. Yet both sides agreed on one thing: no one could look away. In that 2-hour conversation, Katt Williams embodied the duality that had followed him for decades. Part philosopher, part firebrand, caught between revelation and delusion. The interview reignited his relevance, but it also exposed how fragile his peace remained. He spoke as if trying to convince the world and perhaps himself that he was still in control. What emerged was not a comeback story, but a mirror reflecting both the brilliance and the breakdown of a man whose truth had always been too large for comfort. A legacy of laughter and pain. In the twilight of his career, Katt Williams continues to walk the thin line between genius and agony. Though now in his mid-50s, he still takes the stage, his movements smaller, but his words sharper than ever. The crowds remain loyal, drawn not only by nostalgia, but by the gravity of truth that clings to every sentence he utters. Behind the tailored suits and radiant smile lies a man still wrestling with the same demons that once haunted his youth. The laughter he creates often echoes louder than his silence, masking the ongoing struggle with mental instability and solitude. Fame has aged him not in body but in spirit, leaving behind a performer who has seen the price of brilliance too clearly. Each performance is both therapy and confession, a reminder that survival for him has never been an ending, but an act renewed every night under the spotlight. What makes Katt Williams remarkable is not merely his endurance, but his refusal to dilute his message. In an industry that rewards conformity, he remains unbent, using humor as both shield and weapon. His comedy no longer seeks validation, it seeks truth. He speaks about race inequality and the invisible wounds of a system that celebrates black pain while profiting from it. Audiences laugh, but behind the amusement is a collective discomfort, a realization that his jokes are built on real scars. To some, his words sound bitter. To others, liberating. In an era obsessed with image, Katt's raw honesty stands as both rebellion and redemption. He doesn't chase trends, nor does he crave pity. Every line he delivers carries the weight of experience, the story of a man who was broken, rebuilt himself with laughter, and still bears the cracks as proof of his humanity. Yet his legacy is complicated by tragedy. The very culture that elevated him has often failed to understand him. America's entertainment machine thrives on narratives of struggle, but rarely provides space for healing. Katt's battles with mental illness are not isolated incidents. They reflect a deeper truth about how the nation treats its wounded icons, especially those who are black, outspoken, and unwilling to perform gratitude for survival. His life embodies the cost of honesty in a world that prefers illusions. While others sanitized their stories for fame, he bared his soul and paid for it in loneliness. In many ways, his tragedy is not the presence of illness, but the absence of empathy, the silence that follows once the laughter stops. Still, history will not remember Katt Williams solely for his controversies or breakdowns. It will remember a pioneer who transformed stand-up comedy into social commentary, who turned pain into poetry and hardship into humor. His voice, unfiltered and unwavering, forced audiences to confront uncomfortable realities long before it was fashionable to do so. He stands as one of the few comedians whose work transcended entertainment, cutting into the conscience of a generation. Even as isolation shadows him, his legacy glows brighter, a testament to endurance, defiance, and truth. Katt Williams may never find the peace he deserves, but his art ensures that the world will never forget the beauty hidden within his suffering. Katt Williams remains one of the most polarizing figures in modern comedy, a man whose genius and pain refuse to be separated. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how society praises brilliance while ignoring the suffering behind it. Was he a victim of fame or a visionary punished for honesty? That question lingers unresolved. What is certain is that his voice, fierce, flawed, and unforgettable, still echoes beyond the stage. Here on Legends of Black Excellence, we leave you with this thought. Does America celebrate its black legends or simply survive them?